plane, I was told by some of the workmen, was really held up by an enormous hive of bees. We get bees inside the offices, and when I asked for people to come and do something about that, they said if we eliminated these bees, Rice, the building would fall down, because they've used this entire wall. Between the two walls is a hive, and there's nothing we can do about that.
When I first came to the Office of Population Research, we were located over on 5 Ivy Lane, and I was hired as a typist to type Irene Teuber's latest book, The Population of Japan. I seem to have worked on that book for a whole year and 3 typings. Later, I finally finished. I can remember George Barclay being in the office doing a lot of statistics. I remember him using calculators a lot in that room.
In those days, you didn't have all the electronic gadgets that you have now, and we were very proud when we got great, big, huge Friedens that were heavy machines. I think they cost about $900 or $1,000 a piece. And last I heard, they were stored up in the attic somewhere because they had been entirely replaced by much smaller and more modern machines of every kind.
So I applied to go to 2 economics departments. I applied to Yale and to Princeton. And I got a letter back from Yale saying, given what your interest is, why in the world would you want to come here? Why don't you go to Princeton? I got a letter back from Princeton saying, we'd be happy to have you. And when you get here, why don't you show up and talk to this man Ansley Cole, which I dreaded terribly, given that I thought he must be the dullest man in the world to have written this book with so many numbers. So I arrived in Princeton, and I did go to see Ansley Cole, and he welcomed me quite cordially. It was a wonderful place. The office at the time was located at 5 Ivy Lane. I was about the last group of graduate students to come in when we were still at 5 Ivy Lane before we moved up the hill to Cannon Club. It was a wonderful place at the time. The 5 Ivy Lane was a rabbit warren, a little nest of offices, and I was lucky enough to be given this little office that was no bigger than a desk, but it had an air conditioner, so that in the summertime I could get it down to at least 50 degrees. I'd keep on the air conditioner and sit in there all by myself. The day after I had arrived, I was walking around near the used store and happened to run into Charlie Westoff, who was carrying a tennis racket, as always, and gave me my first word of advice at Princeton that I would never succeed at the office if I didn't learn how to play tennis.
I had to figure out what to do at lunchtime, and I used to play a lot of bridge. I met Ansley playing bridge. And then the warm weather arrived and everybody went out on the tennis court. I was left without a bridge partner. And that's what forced me to learn tennis. That was 30 some odd years ago. We had the courts opposite 5 Ivy Lane, and Ansley set up a shower by hooking a garden hose to the faucet in the upstairs john and putting it out with a sprinkler on the roof. And there was not exactly very much modesty there. We were up on the roof and showering, yeah. In the buff. But in cold water. Ansley loved the cold water.
When I first came here and we were having classes down in 5 Ivy Lane, there was a big room that the class was held in. Not as big as the room in the big hall, but still very big. And there would often be 20 to 35 students in the Wednesday afternoon class. And Ansley's way of teaching, one of his modes of teaching was to teach by using graphs. He was very big on graphs. It was very interesting to learn this and to see it in the very first days, in my very first days as a graduate student here, and it certainly has stuck with me, the importance of graphs and how much one can convey visually. But the unusual thing that Ansley did was that he would sit up in the front of the room and pull out. He would hold up a series of graphs that were on 8.5 by 11 paper. So he'd sit right in the middle of the room hold up something just like this. Of course, it would be about as visible as this will be on this camera. For those of us who were more than 2 feet away, of course, it was entirely illegible. And everybody snickered about it all the time. I don't think Ansley ever really understood that nobody could see a damn thing looking at these graphs, no matter how pretty they were. I think he finally understood one day when, about 3/4 of the way through the semester, he held up one of these little graphs, which is even smaller than usual, and a student in the back row pulled out a pair of binoculars. He stared at it like that. He broke the class up.
1969. In the summer of 1969, I moved to Princeton. I suppose my first memory of coming to the office was carrying a 6-month-old Katie Menken, who came in and promptly crawled across the floor into Ansley's office. And so his introduction to the new member of OPR was of a little sprout who is about to enter college now, coming in and climbing up across his papers. At the time, OPR was in 5 Ivy Lane, a very small and friendly and some would say decrepit, but not those who loved it. A very lovely building. And there were a group of people who were still active either in the office or in the world of demography who were there that year. I think that the great class of 69 consisted of Rice Lyons, Nancy Howell, who had just returned from Africa and had completed the data collection for her work on the demography of the Kung Bushmen. I can't click properly, but it's supposed to have a click before you say the word. And she came to OPR to learn the kinds of techniques that would allow her to infer more about the fertility and mortality of that particular population than one could obtain from a population that didn't know its ages. They did have a very clear idea of who was older than whom. So you could find out a ranking, and they had very specific terms. They have very specific terms in their language for describing someone who is, for addressing someone who is older or younger than themselves. And that was the beginning of her work in this area. Mike Teitelbaum came from Oxford, where he was completing his thesis.